In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Heights, life moved at a predictable pace. The streets were lined with perfectly manicured lawns, white picket fences stood proudly in front yards, and every house seemed to compete silently for the title of most neighborly. It was the kind of place where people waved politely as they drove by, but gossip traveled faster than anyone cared to admit. Everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Jack Thompson had recently moved into this picture-perfect community. He chose Willow Heights because it promised tranquility, something he desperately needed after spending years in high-stress situations. Jack wasn't your typical suburban dad. On the surface, he looked like any other middle-aged man, average height, short brown hair starting to gray at the temples, and a calm demeanor that made him seem approachable. But beneath that unassuming exterior lay a wealth of experience most people couldn't even imagine. Before settling down in Willow Heights, Jack had spent over 2 decades training some of the toughest SWAT teams in the country. His job involved teaching officers how to handle dangerous scenarios with precision, strategy, and composure. Whether it was hostage situations, high-risk arrests, or disaster response, Jack had seen it all and taught others how to navigate those moments without losing their cool. After retiring from active duty, he decided it was time to step away from the chaos and start fresh. Little did he know, his new life would soon become just as eventful as his old one. When Jack first arrived on Maple Street, he kept to himself. He didn't throw wild parties or blast loud music late at night. Instead, he focused on unpacking boxes, setting up his modest home, and figuring out where the nearest grocery store was. His backyard was slightly overgrown, and his trash cans occasionally stayed out past collection day, but nothing about his behavior screamed troublemaker. Still, whispers began circulating among the neighbors almost immediately. You see, Willow Heights wasn't just any ordinary suburb. It was governed by strict homeowners association, HOA rules designed to maintain its pristine image. These rules covered everything from lawn length to mailbox colors, and breaking them could result in fines, warnings, or worse, public shaming. Most residents adhered strictly to these guidelines, fearing retaliation from the HOA's self-appointed enforcer. And if there was one person who took the HOA rules more seriously than anyone else, it was Karen Peterson. Karen was notorious in Willow Heights. She wasn't officially part of the HOA board, but she acted like she ran the entire organization. Armed with a clipboard, a stack of highlighters, and an endless supply of passive-aggressive notes, Karen patrolled the neighborhood like a soldier on a mission. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. A crooked welcome mat, a single weed poking through, someone's flower bed, or a car parked half an inch over the curb. If you lived in Willow Heights, chances are you'd received at least one of Karen's infamous letters detailing your alleged infractions. At first, Karen tried reaching out to Jack the polite way, or what passed for polite in her world. She slipped neatly typed notes under his door reminding him to trim his grass and remove his recycling bins promptly. Each note grew increasingly stern, peppered with phrases like community standards and failure to comply may result in consequences. But Jack never responded. Not because he was ignoring her intentionally, but because he simply hadn't noticed the notes amidst the chaos of moving in. This lack of response only fueled Karen's determination. To her, Jack's silence was proof that he didn't care about the neighborhood's well-being. How dare he disrupt the harmony of Willow Heights with his unkempt yard and misplaced garbage cans? Something had to be done, and Karen was just the woman for the job. What Karen didn't realize, however, was that she was about to tangle with someone far more skilled at handling confrontations than she could ever dream of being. While Karen prided herself on her ability to intimidate neighbors into submission, Jack's expertise lay in diffusing tension and staying calm under pressure. Years of working in high-stakes environments had taught him how to read people, anticipate their moves, and respond strategically. He wasn't easily rattled, and he certainly wasn't afraid of someone wielding a clipboard. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's frustration reached a boiling point. She began recruiting allies to bolster her cause, determined to make an example out of Jack. Unbeknownst to her, this decision would lead to one of the most memorable showdowns Willow Heights had ever witnessed. Little did Karen know, she was walking straight into a situation she couldn't possibly prepare for. Because while she might have been the queen of petty disputes, Jack was a master of real-life strategy, and he was about to show her exactly what that meant. The stage was set for a clash between order and chaos, rules and reality. All it took was one sunny Saturday morning for the drama to unfold, and for Jack to reveal a side of himself that no one in Willow Heights saw coming. Karen Peterson was a force to be reckoned with in Willow Heights. She wasn't tall or imposing, standing at barely 5'4", but her presence loomed large over the neighborhood. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, always sprayed into beurre, placed as if bracing against a hurricane, framed a face that rarely cracked a genuine smile. Instead, her lips were often pursed in disapproval, her eyebrows perpetually arched in judgment. Karen carried herself with an air of authority, as though she'd been personally appointed by the universe to uphold the sanctity of suburban living. Her weapon of choice, a clipboard. It was her constant companion, clutched tightly in one hand while the other wielded a fluorescent pink highlighter. The clipboard contained lists upon lists, names of neighbors, alleged violations, and deadlines for compliance. Each entry was meticulously documented, complete with notes written in all caps for emphasis. To Karen, this clipboard wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of power. It represented her unwavering dedication to maintaining community standards, even if those standards sometimes bordered on absurd. Karen's reputation preceded her. She had once reported the Johnson family for having mismatched curtains, a grievance so minor it made the HOA board roll their eyes behind closed doors. Another time, she waged a month-long campaign against holiday decorations being displayed before Thanksgiving, going so far as to draft a petition demanding stricter enforcement of seasonal decor guidelines. Her victories were small but celebrated, within her own mind. Every victory, no matter how trivial, reinforced her belief that she was indispensable to Willow Heights. But Karen didn't operate alone, at least not entirely. She understood the importance of having backup, especially when dealing with particularly stubborn offenders. For Jack Thompson, she assembled what she referred to as her neighborhood integrity squad. This ragtag team consisted of Tim Reynolds, a nervous accountant who lived 2 doors down, and Linda Harper, a yoga instructor known for her love of gossip and lavender-scented candles. Neither Tim nor Linda particularly enjoyed playing sidekick to Karen, but they also didn't have the courage to say no. Saying no to Karen was like poking a hornet's nest, with slightly less chance of survival. Tim joined the squad reluctantly. He was a mild-mannered man in his mid-40s with thinning hair and a tendency to sweat under pressure. His main goal in life was to avoid conflict, which ironically made him an easy target for Karen's recruitment efforts. When she approached him about helping with Operation Neighborhood Integrity, as she dramatically dubbed the mission, Tim stammered something vague about needing to check his calendar. But Karen didn't take no for an answer. With a few well-placed guilt trips and reminders about his responsibility to the community, she secured his reluctant participation. Linda, on the other hand, was more intrigued than intimidated by Karen's schemes. While she didn't share Karen's obsession with perfection, she found the drama oddly entertaining. Plus, it gave her plenty of material for her weekly book club meetings where tales of Karen's antics were met with equal parts disbelief and amusement. Still, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something about this particular operation felt off. Confronting Jack seemed different from reporting someone for leaving their garage door open overnight. There was a tension in the air, a sense that things might not go according to plan. Operation Neighborhood Integrity began with a flurry of activity. Karen spent hours poring over HOA rulebooks, highlighting sections she believed applied to Jack's so-called transgressions. She photocopied pages, stapled them together, and created a dossier that would make any corporate lawyer proud. Meanwhile, Tim and Linda were tasked with gathering intelligence. They were instructed to observe Jack's house from a distance, noting anything suspicious or out of place. Tim tried to argue that spying on a neighbor felt unethical, but Karen silenced him with a sharp glare and a reminder that they were doing this for the good of the community. As the day of the confrontation approached, Karen's excitement grew. She rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror, practicing different tones and gestures to ensure maximum impact. She envisioned Jack cowering in shame, apologizing profusely for his negligence. In her mind, the encounter would end with him thanking her for setting him straight and promising to become a model resident. What Karen failed to consider, however, was that Jack wasn't your average neighbor. And while she prepared for a battle of wills, she had no idea she was walking into a masterclass in strategy and composure. On the morning of the operation, Karen gathered her troops in her driveway. Dressed in her signature khaki capris and polo shirt embroidered with the words, "Willow Heights Ambassador," she looked every bit the part of a suburban warrior. Tim fidgeted nervously beside her, adjusting his glasses and avoiding eye contact. Linda stood a few steps back, clutching a reusable water bottle and wondering if she should have stayed home. Karen reviewed the plan one final time, emphasizing the importance of sticking to the script. "We're here to enforce the rules," she declared, her voice firm and authoritative. "And we won't leave until Mr. Thompson understands the gravity of his actions." With that, the trio marched toward Jack's house, their footsteps echoing ominously on the pavement. Karen led the way, her clipboard held high like a shield. Tim trailed behind, muttering under his breath about how this was a terrible idea. Linda brought up the rear, silently praying that Jack wouldn't call the police. None of them realized that they were about to stumble into a situation far beyond their comprehension, and that Jack's calm demeanor masked a lifetime of experience in handling exactly this kind of chaos. As they reached Jack's front door, Karen rang the bell with purpose, her finger pressing down repeatedly as if to signal urgency. Inside, Jack was finishing his second cup of coffee, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside. When he finally opened the door, still wearing sweatpants and holding his mug, Karen launched into her tirade without missing a beat. Words spilled out of her mouth in a torrent of indignation, each sentence laced with thinly veiled hostility. Jack listened patiently, his expression unreadable, as Karen ranted about property maintenance violations and the importance of setting a good example for the neighborhood. What Karen didn't know was that Jack was already several steps ahead of her. Years of training SWAT teams had taught him how to assess a situation quickly and respond accordingly. As Karen spoke, Jack observed her body language, the rigid posture, the exaggerated gestures, the way her voice rose in pitch when she grew agitated. He recognized the signs of someone trying desperately to assert control, even as her grip on the situation slipped. Without saying a word, Jack had already begun formulating his counter-strategy. He knew better than to engage emotionally. Instead, he remained calm, letting Karen dig herself deeper into her own narrative. When Karen demanded entry into his home to inspect for further infractions, citing obscure HOA bylaws, Jack simply raised an eyebrow. The request was ridiculous, bordering on invasive, but he didn't react with anger or frustration. Instead, he nodded slowly as if considering her demand, before stepping aside to let her in. Karen strutted past him, clipboard poised for action, completely oblivious to the fact that she was now playing a game she couldn't possibly win. Tim and Linda exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that this visit was about to take a turn neither of them anticipated. Unbeknownst to Karen, Jack's home wasn't just any ordinary house. It was filled with subtle clues about his past, trophies from training exercises, certificates of excellence, and photographs capturing moments of triumph and teamwork. These items weren't displayed ostentatiously. Rather, they blended seamlessly into the decor, almost inviting curiosity. Jack knew that Karen's nosy nature would lead her to snoop around, and he was ready to use that to his advantage. As she moved from room to room, pointing out imaginary dust particles and critiquing furniture placement, Jack followed quietly, biding his time. The moment of truth came when Karen accused Jack of harboring illegal weapons, basing her claim solely on the fact that his garage door was closed. It was a desperate attempt to justify her intrusion, but it played right into Jack's hands. With a calm smile, he invited her to step outside and see for herself. As the garage door rolled up, revealing shelves stocked with gardening tools and neatly organized supplies, Karen's confidence wavered. But it was the framed photo of Jack leading a SWAT training exercise that truly stopped her in her tracks. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. Not only was Jack not the negligent neighbor she'd imagined, but he was also someone who could dismantle her entire argument with ease. For the first time in her reign as HOA patrol commander, Karen found herself speechless. The morning air was crisp and cool, the kind that made you want to sip coffee on the porch or take a leisurely stroll through the neighborhood. But for Karen Peterson, there was no time to enjoy such luxuries. Today was the day she would finally confront Jack Thompson, the man who had become the bane of her existence, or at least the latest target of her obsessive crusade for perfection in Willow Heights. With clipboard in hand, and her two reluctant accomplices trailing behind her, Karen marched up Jack's driveway like a general leading troops into battle. Jack, meanwhile, had no idea what was coming. He had spent the morning puttering around the house, catching up on laundry and sipping his second cup of coffee while listening to soft jazz on the radio. The sound of the doorbell ringing repeatedly startled him out of his relaxed state. "Who could that be?" he muttered under his breath as he set down his mug and shuffled toward the front door. Still wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, Jack opened the door to find Karen standing there, flanked by Tim and Linda, all three looking as if they'd just stepped off the set of a low-budget reality TV show about suburban drama. Karen didn't waste a second. Before Jack could even say hello, she launched into a rehearsed tirade that sounded more like a courtroom indictment than a neighborly chat. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice sharp and clipped, "I've tried reaching out to you multiple times regarding several violations of our community standards." She paused dramatically, flipping through pages on her clipboard as though she were presenting evidence in a high-profile case. "Your lawn is overgrown, your trash cans are left out past collection hours, and frankly, your overall neglect is bringing down the property values of this entire street." Jack blinked, taken aback not by the accusations themselves but by the sheer intensity of Karen's delivery. Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing with a mix of indignation and self-righteousness. He glanced at Tim and Linda, who both looked deeply uncomfortable, Tim shifting his weight from one foot to the other and Linda clutching her reusable water bottle like it might offer some form of protection. They clearly hadn't signed up for this level of confrontation. "Okay," Jack said slowly, leaning against the doorframe. "I'll admit, I've been meaning to get to those things. Moving in has been a little hectic, but I'll take care of it soon." His tone was calm, almost soothing, which only seemed to infuriate Karen further. "That's not good enough," she snapped, jabbing her highlighter in his direction for emphasis. "This isn't just about you, Mr. Thompson. It's about setting an example for everyone else in Willow Heights. If we let one person slide, where does it end? Next thing you know, people will be parking RVs in their driveways and painting their houses neon green." Jack raised an eyebrow, suppressing a smile. "Neon green? Really?" He couldn't help but marvel at how quickly Karen escalated from minor infractions to apocalyptic scenarios. Still, he kept his composure, knowing better than to engage emotionally. Years of training SWAT teams had taught him that reacting impulsively only fueled aggression. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully, giving Karen the impression that he was taking her concerns seriously, even though he wasn't. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She had come prepared for resistance, and she wasn't about to leave without making her point crystal clear. "Look," she said, straightening her posture and squaring, her shoulders as if preparing for round two. Karen's next move caught Jack completely off guard, but then again that was her intention. Without waiting for permission, she pushed past him and stepped into his house, clipboard still clutched tightly in her hands. Tim and Linda hesitated at the doorway, exchanging nervous glances as if silently debating whether to follow her or make a run for it. Jack, however, didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly closed the door behind them and turned to face Karen, his expression unreadable. Inside, Karen wasted no time asserting her dominance. She moved through the living room with the confidence of someone who believed they were on a mission of utmost importance. Her eyes darted around, scanning every corner for signs of disorder or rule-breaking. Hmm, she muttered, tapping, her highlighter against her chin. This coffee table is dusty, and these curtains, they're uneven. She paused dramatically, turning to glare at Jack as though he'd personally insulted her by failing to align fabric patterns perfectly. Jack watched her with quiet amusement, his arms crossed casually over his chest. Years of training elite, SWAT teams had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, and right now Karen was providing the perfect opportunity to put those skills to use. He didn't interrupt her rant. Instead, he observed her carefully, noting the way her voice grew louder and more shrill with each passing comment. It was clear she was trying to intimidate him, but Jack knew better than to let her rattle him. In fact, he found her behavior almost comical. As Karen continued her inspection tour, Tim and Linda lingered awkwardly near the entrance, unsure of what to do. Tim kept glancing at the exit, probably calculating how quickly he could escape without being noticed. Linda, meanwhile, seemed torn between fascination and discomfort. She leaned closer to Tim and whispered, "Do you think this is legal?" Tim shrugged helplessly, clearly regretting his decision to join Karen's crusade. Karen, oblivious to their whispered exchange, marched into the kitchen next. She opened cabinets, peered into drawers, and even inspected the contents of Jack's recycling bin. "Plastic bags mixed with glass bottles," she exclaimed, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is unacceptable." Jack raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting her vent while he mentally catalogued her increasingly ridiculous complaints. At this rate, she'd soon accuse him of hoarding illegal contraband based on the placement of his cereal boxes. Real fireworks began when Karen demanded access to Jack's garage. Up until now, she had been content to criticize his interior decor and household habits, but the closed garage door seemed to ignite a new level of suspicion in her mind. "Why is your garage door shut?" she asked sharply, pointing an accusatory finger at it. "What are you hiding in there?" Jack blinked, momentarily stunned by the absurdity of her question. Hiding? Seriously? But he recovered quickly, his years of tactical training kicking in once again. Rather than arguing or laughing off her accusation, he decided to play along, for now. "Well," he said smoothly, walking toward the garage door with exaggerated nonchalance. "If you're so curious, why don't we take a look together?" Karen hesitated for a split second, perhaps realizing that she might be pushing things too far. But her determination outweighed her caution, and she nodded curtly, following him like a hawk circling its prey. Tim and Linda trailed behind, their faces pale with apprehension. The tension in the air was palpable, as if everyone except Jack knew they were teetering on the edge of something unpredictable. With a flick of a switch, Jack rolled up the garage door. Inside, the space was tidy and organized, a stark contrast to the chaotic scene unfolding outside. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with tools, gardening supplies, and neatly stacked bins. A workbench stood in one corner, complete with screwdrivers, wrenches, and other equipment arranged in precise order. But what caught Karen's attention immediately, and stopped her cold in her tracks, was the wall adorned with framed photographs, certificates, and trophies. Her eyes widened as she took in the display. There were pictures of Jack standing, alongside groups of officers dressed in tactical gear, leading training exercises in various locations across the country. Certificates of excellence hung proudly beside awards recognizing his contributions to law enforcement. One photo, in particular, stood out. Jack demonstrating defensive maneuvers with a group of SWAT team members, his focus sharp and commanding. For a moment, Karen just stared, her mouth slightly agape as the pieces clicked into place. "Oh," she stammered, her voice suddenly much softer than before. You train SWAT teams?" "That's right," Jack replied, his tone casual, but firm. He stepped forward, gesturing toward the photos. "I spent over 20 years teaching officers how to handle high-pressure situations, things like hostage rescues, active shooter scenarios, and disaster response. These guys trust me to keep them safe, and I take that responsibility seriously." Karen's face flushed red, though it was impossible to tell whether it was from embarrassment or anger or maybe both. She clutched her clipboard tighter, as if it could somehow shield her from the growing realization that she had vastly underestimated the man standing in front of her. Tim and Linda exchanged wide-eyed looks, finally understanding why Jack hadn't reacted defensively to Karen's accusations. If anything, he had handled the entire situation with the kind of poise and patience that only someone with extensive experience in conflict resolution could muster. But Jack wasn't done yet. Sensing an opportunity to turn the tables, he offered Karen a polite smile. "You know, since you're so interested in rules and regulations, maybe I could give you and your friends a quick lesson in communication and de-escalation techniques. It's always good to have tools for resolving conflicts peacefully." Karen sputtered, clearly unprepared for this twist. I don't need lessons," she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Behind her, Tim and Linda nodded eagerly, clearly intrigued by the idea of learning something useful from Jack. After all, dealing with difficult neighbors was a skill most people could benefit from. Jack chuckled softly, not unkindly. "Suit yourself," he said, shrugging. "But if you ever change your mind, feel free to stop by. I'm happy to share what I've learned." For the first time since arriving at Jack's house, Karen found herself at a loss for words. She glanced around the garage one last time, her gaze lingering on the trophies and certificates before muttering something about needing to leave. With that, she turned on her heel and hurried back toward the driveway, her clipboard held stiffly. At her side, Tim and Linda scrambled after her, offering apologetic smiles over their shoulders as they went. As Jack watched them go, he couldn't help but shake his head with a mixture of amusement and mild pity. Karen had come armed with accusations and a sense of superiority, but she had left humbled, if not entirely enlightened. Still, he hoped that today's encounter might inspire her to reconsider her approach to enforcing HOA rules. After all, even the most stubborn opponents could learn valuable lessons when faced with a little perspective. Back inside, Jack poured himself another cup of coffee and settled onto the couch, reflecting on the morning's events. Life in Willow Heights was proving to be far more eventful than he'd anticipated, but then again, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. As Jack stood in the doorway watching Karen and her entourage retreat down the driveway, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, not because he had won their confrontation, but because he had handled it with grace and professionalism. He knew that moments like these were opportunities to teach, not just for others but also for himself. While Karen's behavior had been over the top, even laughable at times, Jack recognized that she wasn't entirely to blame for her actions. People often acted out of fear or insecurity, projecting their own anxieties onto others in an attempt to regain control. In Karen's case, her obsession with enforcing HOA rules likely stemmed from a deeper need to feel important, to believe she was contributing something meaningful to the community. With that thought in mind, Jack decided to take things one step further. As much as he wanted to close the door, sip his coffee, and forget about the whole ordeal, he knew this situation presented a unique chance to bridge a gap, to show Karen and her companions that conflict didn't have to be combative. It could be constructive. So instead of letting them leave without another word, Jack called out after them, "Hey, wait a second." His voice was calm and friendly, carrying none of the tension that might have escalated the encounter earlier. Karen froze mid-step, her shoulders stiffening as if bracing for another round of criticism. Tim and Linda turned around hesitantly, clearly unsure what to expect next. Jack walked toward them, his hands in his pockets exuding the same relaxed demeanor that had disarmed Karen inside the house. "I know you're all passionate about keeping Willow Heights looking nice," Jack began, his tone conversational, rather than confrontational. "And honestly, I respect that. A neighborhood is only as strong as the people who live in it." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "But sometimes, passion can turn into frustration when we don't communicate effectively. That's where training comes in." Karen frowned, clearly suspicious of where this was going. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice tinged with defensiveness. Jack smiled warmly, unfazed by her skepticism. "Well, Since you're so interested in enforcing rules and maintaining order, I figured you might appreciate some tips on how to handle situations like this one, without causing unnecessary stress for everyone involved. He gestured toward his garage where the framed photos and certificates still hung proudly. I've spent years teaching officers how to de-escalate high-pressure scenarios. Those same principles apply here too. Tim and Linda exchanged curious glances, their initial discomfort giving way to genuine interest. They weren't experts in conflict resolution, but they understood that dealing with difficult neighbors, or being dragged into someone else's drama, was no easy task. If Jack could offer tools to make those interactions less awkward and more productive, why not listen? Karen, however, remained guarded. I already know how to handle things, she insisted, though her wavering confidence betrayed her words. She adjusted her grip on the clipboard, as if clinging to it for support. This neighborhood doesn't need your tactics. Jack nodded patiently, refusing to rise to the bait. Fair enough, he said. But humor me for a moment. Let's say you're trying to address a concern with a neighbor, someone who maybe hasn't responded to your notes or calls. How would you approach them? Karen opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated, suddenly aware that she didn't have a clear answer. Her usual strategy involved escalating the issue until the person caved under pressure. But that method clearly hadn't worked with Jack. For once, she found herself questioning whether there might be a better way. Seeing her uncertainty, Jack pressed gently. The key is empathy, he explained. Instead of assuming the worst about someone, try to understand where they're coming from. Maybe they're busy, or maybe they simply haven't noticed the problem yet. Starting with curiosity rather than accusation makes a big difference. To illustrate his point, Jack shared a story from his SWAT training days. He described a tense standoff involving a suspect barricaded inside a home. The team's first instinct had been to storm the building, but Jack urged them to slow down and assess the situation carefully. By establishing communication and showing compassion for the suspect's fears, they were able to resolve the crisis peacefully, a lesson that stayed with him long after the incident ended. That's impressive, Linda murmured, breaking the silence that followed Jack's story. Even Tim nodded approvingly, his earlier nervousness replaced by admiration. Karen, however, looked conflicted. On one hand, she seemed reluctant to admit that Jack's approach held merit. On the other, she couldn't deny that her own methods often left her feeling frustrated and unfulfilled. Sensing her internal struggle, Jack softened his tone. Look, I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong, he reassured her. You care about this neighborhood, that's obvious. But caring isn't enough. Sometimes we need to rethink how we express that care. Rules are important, sure, but relationships matter more. For a brief moment, Karen's stern expression faltered. Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she glanced at Tim and Linda, perhaps seeking validation or guidance. When neither of them spoke up, she sighed heavily and muttered, "Fine. Maybe there's room for improvement." It wasn't exactly an admission of fault, but it was progress, and Jack knew better than to push for more. Instead, he extended a friendly handshake. "Thanks for stopping by," he said with a smile. "If you ever want to talk more about strategies for handling tough conversations, my door's always open." Karen hesitated before shaking his hand, her grip firm but cautious. "We'll see," she replied curtly, though there was a hint of softness in her voice that hadn't been there before. With that, she turned and strode back to her car, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a shield. Tim and Linda lingered for a moment longer, offering polite goodbyes before hurrying after her. As Jack watched them drive away, he felt a small sense of accomplishment. He hadn't changed Karen overnight, and he didn't expect to, but he had planted a seed, one that might grow into something positive if given the right conditions. More importantly, he had demonstrated that kindness and understanding could go a long way, even in the face of hostility. Back inside, Jack poured himself another cup of coffee and settled onto the couch, reflecting on the morning's events. Life in Willow Heights was proving to be far more eventful than he'd anticipated, but then again, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. After all, every challenge was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to connect with others in unexpected ways, and who knows, perhaps Karen Peterson would surprise him yet.